Brad, here, this, I'm gonna put it right here.
Okay.
And come here. So I'm gonna do a little introduction.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. When you sit here? Can I sit here?
Okay.
Sit
Thank
here
you.
or stand,
Thank you.
whatever you want.
Okay.
This breaks every password.
Susan. Gotta keep it. Okay. Okay.
When should I just start any?
I'm going to.
Okay. Okay,
Not everybody's in.
that's fine.
We're all here. This is welcome. Before we begin, we would like everyone to settle in Quaker fashion for a very short settling in of silence. How we always begin things. So welcome, friends and neighbors. This is lovely. We're so happy you're here with us tonight. Quaker practice is to listen. And friends have gathered here since 1887 to listen to each other and to listen to the spirit within. So tonight we're all come together to listen to award-winning journalist and author Cody McDevitt speak about his book, Banished from Johnstown, a little known thing in 1923 of racist backlash that happened that got swept under. So let's listen and learn together. And questions and answers will follow when Cody is done. And those of you out there in Zoom land, I don't know if you already know, but if you have questions and answers, questions and comments, put them in the chat, and Brad here will monitor them and read them, correct?
That's correct.
Can I stand when I'm speaking?
Whatever you'd
You
like.
do whatever you want.
Yeah, I'll put you on the camera.
So, okay, I'm going to turn it over to Cody.
Normally, I have some sort of PowerPoint show, but it's short, so I'm gonna have to do it without the technology. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was a reporter in the Somerset Daily American for about 5 years, and while there, I wanted to do a Black history story because we also wrote about Johnstown, which has a significant Black population there. And so I went to the local museum. And I asked them, what is the specific local Black history story that would be of interest for a newspaper article? And so I heard about this incident that is the basis for the book. And then a bunch of people told me, this sounds like a book project. And so I went on a 5-year research journey that culminated with the publication of Banished from Johnstown in 2020. For those who aren't familiar with the event, in 1923, the mayor of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, forced 2,000 African American and Mexican people out of the city at gunpoint under threat of imprisonment. So that's just the event, but I'm going to explain to you what up to the event and then also what transpired after. So beginning in 1917, which was when the onset of World War I, well, World War I started earlier, but America's involvement over in Europe basically accelerated reforms. And so steel mills in places like Johnstown and Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Detroit, Cleveland were short-staffed. And they had to find ways and methods in which they would be able to staff back up. And so they sent recruiters to the South, where they would actually try to lure Black people from the plantations that they worked on or sharecropping arrangements to come up north to work at the mills. And so it started this great demographic shift, called the Great Migration. And this is where they left all the farms that they were working on down south to work in the industries up north. And that is how you see the cities that they are today, with a significant Black population. So there is a demographic shift back south now. As they came, in Johnstown, they were also recruiting from Texas, Mexicans. And so there was a mixture of Black people and Mexicans who came to Johnstown. As they were coming, they got criminalized through newspaper accounts because there was a crime wave that came. There were some criminals among them. And so whenever they described crime committed by the Black community, they would specifically single out the race from the criminal suspect as well as the victim. And so it seemed like there was a greater proclivity to commit crime in the Black community as a result. This also coincided in a time in which the Ku Klux Klan was organizing and gathering supporters at a precedent they've never seen before that or after. And so it became this huge mass movement. And the way that the Klan and white supremacists organized is they localized the hatreds and the appeals in the recruitment pamphlets and posters and flyers they had based on whatever the local prejudice was. And so in Johnstown, while there was also a distrust of Black and Mexican people, there was also a distrust of Jewish people, immigrants, Catholics. And so all of those groups were stigmatized by the Klan. And so this all comes to a head in 1923 when a Black man kills 4 police officers in shootout. Now, in this day and age, if there was a Black man who killed 4 police officers, the community would be outraged. But at the height of the Klan's time, that was an explosive situation. There is a mayor in the community who is running for re-election. His name is Joseph Calfield. Because he wants to get re-elected, he's willing to make appeals to the white supremacist vote. And so he calls a reporter from the Johnstown Democrat to come over, asking him to print a story that he says that he orders all Black and Mexican people who came in the last 7 years during the Great Migration leave town at once. They had nothing to do with the crime. It was just a blanket statement of the 7 years of newcomers. So how does he enforce it? During that time, mayors could also function as magistrates. And so he actually had the ability to send people to jail. And so they would come before court and you would say, get out of town or we're going to send you to jail. And they would agree to leave. And he also had a secret police force that would go through the community and then coerce people to leave. As this happens, word spreads to Pittsburgh, where there's a famous newspaper called the Pittsburgh Courier. It's a Black newspaper, Black journalists, star Black journalists. At the time, Black writers, Black reporters couldn't get jobs at the white newspapers, but they were very talented writers, very talented researchers. And they also had this remarkable editor by the name of Robert Tan. He was a publisher and editor of the Courier. He had made his fortune. First of all, he was one of 700 Black people between like 1820 and 1920 who actually had a college degree. And he had a law degree too. And he also had a ship named after him later. So this was a remarkable person. But he made his money representing Black clients that were accused of crime. White lawyers didn't want to represent them. And so he buys the Pittsburgh Courier and he turns this into one of the most influential and important publications in the country, especially among Black people. And so he draws attention to what happens in Johnstown and starts shifting public opinion against it in the Black community. The white newspapers then follow suit and actually adopt the same thing that Black newspapers do. As the public opinion shifts because of the Black press, Black activist organizations like the NAACP that was led by James Weldon Johnson and Marcus Garvey, who was a rival for power and had different views philosophically, they started talking nationally about what was going on in Johnstown. And so you see the connection between Black press and Black activism. The activist organizations then start sending telegrams to Governor Gifford Pinchot, who was this conservationist under Teddy Roosevelt. At his wife, Cornelia, was very progressive on racial issues. He was also known as a very progressive governor on racial issues as well, and in support of the Black community. So as Pinchot gets inundated with telegrams from all over the country from activists, all advocating for Black people in one form or another, he starts deciding to do something. So he sends an investigator there to ascertain what happened in Johnstown. Now, as this public outcry spreads across the country, there are editorials that appear in the Los Angeles Times, Montana newspapers, New York newspapers, all condemning Joseph Calfield, who was the mayor at the time. And he was the one that did it. And so as the investigator goes there, he ascertains all of the things that happened, and he compiles it in a report. Now, this report was located at the Library of Congress, which is the basis for much of the book, as well as Does anyone do genealogical research here? Okay. There's a site, newspapers.com, and I don't know if anyone's used it before, but you can do keyword searches on old newspapers, and it'll eliminate any newspapers that don't have those keywords in it. And so it eliminates unnecessary reading. And so through the use of that research tool, I was able to construct what happened in this event, as well as with the documents I got at the Library of Congress. Basically, what ended up happening is Calfield lost his bid for re-election. So the news, it's a story of Black victimhood, obviously, but it's also a story of Black heroism, because the Black journalists are the ones, and the Black activists are the ones that caused him to be defeated. And so that's why it's a unique story, because it's not really just simply the story of oppression, it's also a story of empowerment, which is why it's a unique story. Now, 4 years after this happened, the mayor of Johnstown ran for re-election again, and he actually got elected after 2 police officers were killed by Black men at that time. He dies, I think, 3 or 4 years later, and City Hall is draped in mourning. They call him a great mayor. And so it just kind of shows you the treatment historically of this incident during its time and also after. This was pretty much a forgotten part of history. I'm sure a lot of you guys didn't really know about it. I didn't. But that's pretty much in a nutshell what I did. Does anyone have questions for me? Yeah.
In your book, you spend quite a while describing the community of Rosedale.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
So,
and it doesn't exist anymore. Or does it?
yeah. I'm trying to think of the community, because I hadn't been in Johnson. I actually moved to a different neighborhood. You know where Jaha is?
Where, what?
Jaha. What's the name of the Jaha again? Cambria City. Yeah, it's right behind. It's right behind like Cambria City. You go, yeah, the Rosedale Coke plant, and I think it's the Honan Avenue Trail that you can go on. It's actually hiking. You can walk on. You can actually see where Rosedale was. And so there's a nice waterfall there as well. We're actually trying to get a historical marker up on the top of the Honan Avenue Trail. But it was this encampment, the very unsanitary conditions, tense. They recruited these people. They weren't really treating them like human beings, just kind of as cogs in the mill. And so they had they wouldn't change the bed sheets. And so there'd be sickness. And during the pandemic in 1920, tons of people were killed in Rosedale because they were so closely clustered together. But yeah, it's behind Cambria City, up on the Honan Avenue Trail, and you'll see topography of the area. If you go there. Yeah. Other questions?
Cody, can you repeat the question when they give it to you?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm curious because I'm part of the Dunnings Creek Friends here, and we're who invited you to come and speak, and we're trying to put this forum together where the Bedford community can share stories and talk and listen to each other. And I'm curious for yourself, what brought you to this topic? It's one of the things we've done within our community, is to share with each other what is it that brings our hearts to this issue.
You know, I would probably characterize my reading interest as probably progressive and always has been. So I've always been fascinated by Black history. And when I was like in 7th grade, I watched Mississippi Burning. My dad showed me that, and that left a very strong impression on me. And I just took a 2-week trip to the South, so I saw like Men Forever, where all that happened and everything. But Black history always fascinated me. Like when I first started studying Black history, I approached it as like the stories that Black people were just victims, right? Like you have Mississippi Burning, you think white savior, Black victim, But as I studied more Black history and kept engaging Black perspective, I would read things like the autobiography of Malcolm X. I would read W.E.B. Du Bois. And then I would also engage Black people frequently in genealogical groups. I drive Uber in Pittsburgh, and so I've had probably about 30,000 people in my car. Okay, that's some of who I've talked to, and I would say about 25,000 were actually Black people in Pittsburgh. And so I'm actually adapting this into a play right now. And so I learned how Black people spoke by speaking to about 25,000. And so that's like the manners of speech and the cadences, and I also read lines and views. And so I think it was just that I was always fascinated by that history. For whatever reason, maybe my dad had something to do with it, I don't know. Because he's the one who taught me about the civil rights movement and also the Holocaust. He was an Irish guy, but he still found those topics fascinating. And his granddad was the chief of police of Johnstown. Well, my whole family's from the area. I forgot to actually repeat the question.
That's okay.
Yeah.
You got it.
I think people can pick up the context of what I'm saying just by speaking, but yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Was the KKK actively involved in this whole incident in Johnstown?
There were rumors that Calfield, the mayor, was part of the Klan, but the membership's secret. So unless you unearth the actual membership rolls of the Klan, and maybe there actually is the method of doing this, because there are Klan papers in like various libraries, and some of it is being digitized. This is something that I hope to continue to research. It's just in order to track down 2,000, like the descendants of 2,000 people, you need money to do it. I drive Uber in Pittsburgh, and I can't really afford to actually pay for that kind of research. But I'm hoping that someone comes along and wants to maybe partner with me in telling the story in maybe a different medium like film, but also subsidizing research with myself and a Black history group that I'm part of in Pittsburgh. And so what I hope to do is like have all of us work with the financial support of some wealthy patron. Basically learn more about the history. 100-year anniversary is next year. And so that would be the opportunity to attract someone like that. But it remains to be seen whether the publicity is there. I'm hoping it is. I don't know.
Cody, can you tell us something about the Black history group that you work with in Pittsburgh?
It's the Edna McKenzie branch of African American History and Genealogical Society, I think is the name of it. It's a national organization. They actually won branch of the year this year, like the whole nation. And so what we do is we do Zoom presentations, and I did a Zoom presentation there. And I also go and I listen to Zoom presentations about local Black history. If any of you move to cities and you actually want to be kind of I don't want to say an ambassador for your race or anything, but if you want to build race relations, joining Black organizations like the NAACP or Black historical groups where they actually seek white membership and supporters as both paid members and participants will actually help build bridges in your community between races. Now, in a place like Johnstown, maybe that doesn't matter as much, but in a place like Los Angeles, the more people that do that, the less likely racial strife would be to take place. Because sometimes there's no interaction at all between Black and white people, and that's when dangerous things happen. Yeah.
Here we are 100 years past the events in Johnstown, which the Klan played a role, to say the least.
Yeah.
Okay. Based upon your research, your experience, and you're from this neck of the woods, to what extent does the Klan still raise its head around here?
Well, I was actually just in Mississippi for a rally for an unrelated cause to this, but there is a lot of racial overtones to it. And there were actually white supremacists in Mississippi that interrupted the rally. There are obviously white supremacists here, but there's also white supremacists in Pittsburgh. Look what happened in the synagogue. That kind of hate doesn't really know borders. And sometimes in places like Pittsburgh, it can actually be even worse. I think, I said that I drove 25,000 Black people around. So like when I talk to a Black person, for me, I don't even think twice about it. But for a person who never talks to a Black person, like who literally just sits maybe on a forum but never sees a Black person, they probably sit there and see, the first thing they see when they see a Black person walk is that person's Black. Whereas when I see it, I'm like, there's another person. And so the more that you interact with somebody of a different race or religion, and there are intolerances in the Black community too. So if more Black people interact with the Jewish community, there'll be less anti-Semitism in it. And so the more that you interact with people outside of your group, integrate, and develop friendships and meaningful, honest, and forthcoming conversations with people of different races and religions and gender identity, or what have you, the less likely you would act, I think, out of hate towards any one of those groups, because you would see the humanity of the person behind them. That's
So back to his question, do you think it was evidence of current action?
I haven't really been following Johnstown that much. I know Pittsburgh, because I live in Pittsburgh now. And so Pittsburgh, I know that is white supremacy on the rise. And there's also,
Could
yeah.
you repeat the question? I didn't hear the question.
is racial, you're asking if white supremacy is on the rise. Anytime there's racial tension created, there's a rise in white supremacy. And so in cities like Pittsburgh, there's a massive crime wave happening right now. And it's disproportionately affecting communities of color. It's a lot of like Black youth that are getting killed. But as a result of that, for instance, the entire South Side in Pittsburgh, it's all shuttered. They're afraid of drive-by shootings. Okay. And I drive through them and I drive the kids from like places like Braddock and the Keys Quarter, like neighborhoods down there. And I saw the entire neighborhood of Carson Street just disappear. They have like barricades preventing parking spots from being built. When things like that happen, and we can learn a lot from this event in that regard, is while it was a few Black actors that may have done the drive-by shooting, the entire community gets blamed by people that don't interact with any members of the Black community. And so that's when racial tension rises, and it's more likely to see white supremacy in those types of areas. Now, Johnstown's had a criminal crime problem for a while, and I know there's white supremacy here. There's also cultural white supremacy here too.
What does that mean?
I think there's historical roots within it, and because there isn't that much interaction or integration going on, the historical racism hasn't been addressed as well as it has been in Pittsburgh, just because there's more interactions, I think, between races in Pittsburgh than there is in Johnstown. I think there's a lot more segregation in Johnstown than there is here. But there's a lot of segregation in Pittsburgh economically. Because like I also do this too, because I do a lot of economic discrimination, and half the Black population in Allegheny County is on food stamps. Whereas it's like 1.4 million white people live in Allegheny County, and about 70,000 of them are on food stamps. And there's about 150,000 Black people who live in Allegheny County, and it's about 70,000 Black people that are on food stamps. So, and a lot of it is transportation access, and that's why when I went there, I left Johnstown because I didn't want to leave Somerset, it was just lay off the newspaper. But I continued to advocate in Pittsburgh because I thought the biggest form of discrimination there was institutional in the way that, and structural. I didn't think there was a mass transit system. And there wasn't a mass transit system accessing areas that needed it the most. And if that's not there, then Black people can't get to the grocery store. And I knew that because I drove so many Black mothers giant eagle, and they didn't have cars. And then someone would tell me they had to walk to the grocery store, which is miles away. You know, so there's a lot of people that don't really understand what other people go through. But Johnstown itself is a unique situation because it's the poorest city in the state. And so there's both poor Black and poor white people. So there are different unique challenges here. And this is another reason why I want a mass transit system built out towards Monroe, so that they can extend it into a regional system that and access places in like Bedford and Somerset, and Johnstown. Because if you connect those places to maybe a thriving metropolis, you might see some economic revitalization. And so these are things that I'm actually trying to convince leaders there and elsewhere to make happen so that we can address some of them. I think the more people are economically prospering, and the more safe people feel, like away from criminals and violence, the less likely you're going to see white supremacy grow. And so it's all connected, I think. But yeah, other questions? Yeah.
Were any of the displaced persons or their heirs ever compensated for their losses, homes, businesses?
That was something that I called for reparations at the end of the book, which is a controversial one. Reparations are always controversial. It was actually surprising me that it didn't generate more outrage than it did. But I think people were just more shocked by the story itself than the actual reparations. But that's also because we haven't really reached the point where people are really pushing for reparations, because we'd have to track down the descendants to do that. And we'd have to verify that they were actually affected. Now, I know the method in which to do that, but I don't have the resources to research. So they weren't. The answer is no. Other questions?
And there were like 2,002 weeks that left,
Yeah,
basically.
it was actually 2,000 a week, I think. They just packed up their belongings, walked out. Where they went, I don't know, but that's what I hope to find out. And that was the next phase of research as of 2 years ago. But I also wrote another book in the meantime. So we'll see if someone else shows interest in the story. I hope they do. We'll see. Yeah.
One little follow-up question. You said that the effort was made to import a lot of Mexicans from Texas.
Yeah.
And my question is to you, these citizens of the state of Texas?
No, they were imported from Mexico. What was happening in Mexico at the time was the Mexican Revolution. There was a whole bunch of violence. People were fleeing the violence, much like what's happening now. People are fleeing the drug trade because all of their family members are getting killed, and so they're like, we can't stay here because we'll get killed, so we'll go to America. And then there's an immigration crisis because of the drug trade in Mexico. Yeah.
Weren't the borders open between the United States and Mexico in that time? They didn't have closed borders. People went back and forth as they wanted to.
I really couldn't sit here and tell you what happened in the Texas state border because it really wasn't the focus in their research. I'm sure that that's something that you'd probably be able to find out if you read more about.
I mean, I've heard that the borders were open until a certain period of time.
I guarantee you'd be able to find it if you actually bought a book on the Mexican Revolution,
Yes.
because that would tell you whether people actually crossed into Texas. But I don't know the answer.
Just a comment, to compliment our question. There didn't become a definitive border between Texas and Mexico until after the revolution. Okay? People forget that Texas belonged to Spain. Okay,
That's right.
Mexico belonged to Spain. So
That's
in essence, it was the whole region was called New Spain.
Right.
Yeah.
Focusing just on the 2,000 people. Okay, where did they go to?
You know, there was actually
You do a good job of help, but that's one of
that's what I'm hoping. And like that again is a time-consuming and expensive part of research. And so this was designed to be something that kickstarted research. Unfortunately,
a lot went to Pittsburgh. Right?
Yeah, a lot. They say most went west. That was the article. That was the last indication of, insofar as microfilm that I could find, was most went west. I assumed to Pittsburgh, But then you also have to think that it's not just a matter of looking at the manuscript census of Pittsburgh and the manuscript census of Johnstown at the time to see where they went, because there was another massive demographic shift whenever the steel mills in Johnstown left. And so then those people left, then went to other parts. And then at that point, you have a national search, and then you're like, okay, now we have unique names that we have to track down. And you have about, you go to the 1920 census, and you'll have, all right, here's about 1,500 people. Let's just assume that they're there for 3 years. And you have a list of names, and you have to basically build the family tree down. And you have to contact them. And then after you track down people, you would then say, does this ring a bell? Did your ancestors pass the story down? And often among Black people, they don't really talk about these things. So you'd have to find people that talked about it, shared that story with their descendants, and then the descendants would have some sort of either recollection or documentation of their account. And then, if you wanted reparations, you would have to prove some financial loss, which would be if they owned property here and were dispossessed of it. And you could do that going to the clerk of courts, and then seeing the recorder of deeds, and then see property transfers and say, this person never have a property transfer, was just possessed by the government. And then at that point you say, all right, what was the amount of money that was just repossessed by the government, and they left. And then at that point you sit there and say, this person lost $2,000 worth of property in 1923, which in today's value would be what, And I'm just sitting here saying that you would have to do like financial calculations, and then that would be the amount of reparations that they would get. That's the process. Now, as I laid out the process for you, do you think an Uber driver can do it by himself? The answer is no. But it's an ambitious project. I don't know if it will take off, if some other researcher would want to do it with me or take a journey with me, or some filmmaker. But I'm right, like I said, I'm writing a play right now that's going to be staged at the Altoona Theater. I got approached by a guy at the Altoona Theater, and then so I bought a bunch of like old playwriting books. I've never written a play before, so I'm like, and they say it's like they say writing dialogues like reading poetry. So I got a bunch of Langston Hughes in my hands with poetry. And I was like kind of like reading it, and then kind of taking the manners of speech, but also knowing the historical things that I knew, and then kind of constructing scenes based on that. It's actually kind of a fascinating process. Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying about the reparations. That's interesting, but I think maybe more interesting for me is how did people respond to the fact of the story? And like, I wonder, for example, do you have people that say, well, maybe they just moved because they wanted to move, and or can people talk about it in Johnstown or Downey as part of the history of this?
There's been a lot of different reactions. And I'm just going to be completely forthcoming about it. Times past. I mean, I think there's a lot, there's white supremacists that wouldn't give a hoot that it happened. There's white people that are like no, I had no idea. Like my dad is like, no one ever told us. There's some Black people that would sit there and say it was a white author that wrote it, and I don't want to read it, and that happened. And there's some Black people saying, well, it's my history, I'm interested. Thank you for doing it, and hopefully it continues with the help of Black people in the future. And so the 100-year anniversary is next year. I really don't know what's going to happen. That's when the attention will come, but I really don't know how much attention is going to come, or whether it'll go out with like a bang or a whimper, or it'll start a new phase in the research, or whether it'll be, all right, we have 3 people talking on stage for a podcast that maybe 10 people listen to. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah.
Has it gotten attention in among amateur or professional historian groups around the country? Has it been reviewed?
I stayed in contact with some prominent journalists and historians. I did actually send it, George Will, the conservative columnist. I sent him an email. I said, "You're interested in history?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm interested in this. I have ancestors that were from Pennsylvania." So I sent it to him. And then I sent it to a bunch of other journalists as well. And I got a lot of coverage in Pittsburgh, but that was mostly because I just kind of knew a bunch of journalists in Pittsburgh. It didn't really get the national, like, because I had followed the Tulsa massacre, and I know this is a different story, but that one was like all over like 60 Minutes and everything. When I came out with this, I guess I was probably optimistic in how much coverage it would get. I suppose there's, like I said, next year, I don't know what's going to happen. And I have other projects that are also drawing a lot of attention nationally too. And I just signed a literary agent in New York, my next book. Like I said, I mean, next year is kind of the pivotal year for what happens, and I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah.
Well, I'm still thinking about the town of, or the community of Rosedale. And I mean, were there schools and churches there? And
Yes,
stores? And, and they just, whatever happened to the building?
The schools were actually, strangely, even though they weren't legally allowed to segregate, they actually segregated the schools. And so there was a black school and white schools that people went to. In Johnstown, there was a Rosedale school where the black children went. And that was in Rosedale. And there were, churches also follow along ethnic lines. There's also often Polish Catholic churches, Irish Catholic churches. And there are black churches of different denominations too. So there was Bethlehem E, which is still there, Cambria Zion, First Cambria Zion, I think is the name of the church. And so there are different congregations that are still there that preserve some church history, which I visited both of those churches. And I used whatever church history I could to also construct this compelling narrative as I could.
So there are buildings still there?
In Rosedale? No.
No.
No. But the black people in Johnstown moved across Texas. And now a lot of other neighborhoods are also black too. But Rosedale's no longer there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever had any contact with PBS, let's say, Henry Louis Gates, Ken Burns?
No. I know Ken Burns, I just read, is coming out with a Holocaust. Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, my sister told me about that. And I'm a huge Ken Burns fan. I love the Vietnam documentary. But no, I haven't been approached by a documentarian, filmmaker. No one even picked up the film option. Yeah.
Have you considered getting in touch with WQED, that's public TV out of Pittsburgh? They might have some people history oriented within that organization that would like to promote a story that's relatively.
To be honest with you, I approached a bunch of people in 2020, journalists, TV journalists. Some were interested. I got on Ellis Cannon show, but to be honest with you, there wasn't really as much interest in it as I thought there would be. Now, I'm deeply fascinated by the story. I spent 5 years researching Ray, and it's probably my greatest achievement to date. But, sometimes when I research things, you don't realize that some people may not be as interested in topics as you are.
To be fair, there was a bigger headline in 2020.
Yeah, there was the pandemic.
Yeah.
You guys remember that one, right?
Yeah. And there was all the other things that were going on. I mean, I'm proud that I did it. I'm happy I did it, and I think it's an important contribution to local history. I don't know what will happen next, but yeah.
I just wanted to invite everyone who's assembled here to do what we did with Cody, which was ask him to share his story. It's what we've done in our committee. And if there's anyone who feels inspired to tell us what brought them here tonight, I'd love to hear it. We're here to hear your story and to listen, all of us.
We have 2 Zoom questions.
Oh, wonderful.
What was that? We couldn't hear that.
Yeah, we have 2 Zoom questions, so I want to get those. Has anyone been in contact
I assume with you, who knows their family was impacted.
We have next year, there is a descendant, like at the 100th anniversary. There was somebody whose family, like a descendant, will share the family history. And then it'll be a local Black historian, and then myself, and me on a panel. And that's the 100th anniversary. But that's, like I said, I don't know if it'll be a podcast for 10 people listen to, or 1,000 or 100,000. I don't know what's going to happen.
And the next question is, I'm not sure if my observations are correct or not, but it seems that even today there continues to be a highlighting of folks who are Black and arrested for crime more than those who are white, or pictures of them on TV and newspapers that, as you described in your story, your thoughts about how the media
Treats race now. It's really interesting. I think the community newspapers, because I was a community newspaper reporter, we never really identified the race unless they were looking for a suspect. The TV stations, I mean, you know, but the Somerset Daily American. I said they did whenever they.
Generally speaking, the papers in our region, when I read them, they don't hesitate to put the picture of a Black person if a crime is involved.
Yeah, I mean,
even if it's a suspect.
I meant in the text of the story. Like when I wrote crime stories, I just put the person's age and then like the name of the person, the picture. I never did the layout on the web, so I was just talking about my own work. I mean, when you talk about the pictures, yeah, because I mean, I guess when I'm looking at the web and the one-in pictures, and there's like a lot of Black people. And when I think, but to be honest with you, I think the worst is going to be TV news. Yeah, I mean, I think TV news are probably the worst. And then there's like kind of a strange thing going on in national news because they're not the ones that usually cover street crime. And so there's a lot of different approaches with like the New York Times and the Washington Post. But I see a lot different racial treatment in those ones. And I also write on Substack, so there's a different message with Substack. And there's a lot of different like types of journalism going on. A lot of people don't really have research skills anymore. Not really journalism going on. I mean, to be honest with you, I think the biggest problem with journalism today is that they don't use speak here. Everything they get is either on social media. Like, if you really want to know what's going on in a community, you have to talk to members of that community. And so, like, for instance, if you're describing what's going on in the Black community, but never actually set foot in the Black community, and you're just relying on social media, I mean, are you really going to be able to understand or describe those things as a reporter? And you have to be able to do that as a white reporter or as a Black reporter if you're actually on a street level newspaper front, like I was. So you have to go out and actually talk to people in person. And I think social media has also made things worse as well. It's also polarized things. And so we talk about like the tribalism that we see on social media. So in large part because what's happened now is because people's social interactions is confined to social media, but then they also eliminate any ethnic view that may be an uncomfortable one by unfriending the person. And so again, what I would encourage is just talk to people in person. You know, the more you talk to people in person, the more trustful you'll be of humanity. The more you'll understand people, the more easily you'll relate. So that's what I do driving Uber. That's why I actually drove Uber during the pandemic, so I didn't go neurotic. I was always walking to people. I was wearing a mask, my ears were irritated the entire time, but I wasn't like socially isolated, so I kept my mental health. Yeah.
So most of your experience is in Pittsburgh and Johnstown, but have you had experience driving around and talking with folks in small communities like Bedford and Everett? And
well, I mean, I was a reporter in Somerset, like, so I did Myersdale, like covered Myersdale, like the Maple Festival. Well, I mean, I'm saying all the things that I did, but I spent like 6 years in a farming community. I covered agriculture and won awards for agricultural journalism.
I was talking about
Like,
the racial situations in the small communities.
in these areas.
Yeah.
I mean, my experience in small town America at the Somerset Daily American, and I spent a lot of time like talking to small town people. And again, the pandemic really complicated things because right when the book came out, the pandemic hit. And so I was getting invited to communities like this. Was talking, and now it seems to be picking back up. I have a presentation somewhere in Pittsburgh next week, but I don't know what's going to happen or whether I'll be invited to other communities. In Pennsylvania, there was a national, like there's a really good book. This is a local regional history, but there's a great national history of this called Sundown Towns by James Flowen. He was a National Book Award winner, and he actually is the one that gave me the research methods that we would have to use to research it further. And if you're interested in like learning about the national incidents of this happening, that's a good book. And then the other one is called Buried in Bitter Waters, and it was written by Elliot Jaspin, and he's actually a mentor of mine. He's an investigative reporter that won the Pulitzer. And he did a national history as well. And if you want to learn about where it happened elsewhere, those are two good resources to consult. And they say in Pennsylvania it happened in hundreds of towns on some scale or another. I think this is the largest scale it happened in Pennsylvania.
I don't think everybody here, can you explain the Sundown Town? Folks here might not know.
Okay. You heard about when I said about the books called Sundown Town, right? Okay. So outside of these communities, there was a sign that said, "The N-word, don't let your head be seen in this town past sundown." And so he wrote a book called Sundown Towns, where they were prevented from actually staying and overnight, and also forcibly expelled. And so there's a national history book called Sundown Towns that's written by James Flowen. Yeah.
What's the time?
Ever had a sign. Everett's on TikTok right now as the Sundown Town. If you go, I don't do TikTok, but someone sent it to me. Wow, there's Everett. And they named when their sign was removed. I don't remember when it said on TikTok. I think it was the 70s.
So yeah, I mean, you guys know that these towns, like, and what I would say, I was a local historian. If you guys know, like, you can do the same thing with your own community newspaper. Even if you don't write a book, if you just write maybe a newspaper article for your local newspaper, like I discovered this recent event where maybe even 40 people were affected, you would still contribute to the national discussion about these incidents, because actually in James' book, he calls for local historians to do it. And all across the country, in towns as small as this, towns like Johnstown, and even in Pittsburgh where it happened, but no journalists really did it there either. But if you're a local historian, or if you just want to pass time with something, like the Sundown Towns, I mean, that sign in Everett, tell the story of it. Find somebody who saw this. Like the way that I've constructed that story, if you wanted to do a story, just even if you did a 500 to 1,000 word story about the sign itself, okay, you would start maybe finding a Black person who saw the sign. What did they think? And you describe what is called an anecdotal lead. So you would sit there and say, I was horrified and scared to drive through this neighborhood because I saw the sign. I never wanted to come back to this community ever again. And then you have a quote saying that, and then you would go into the history of the town, in the Sundown Towns. You could maybe consult James Flowen's book, mention that it also happened in Johnstown to some extent, or other signs in Pennsylvania. And if you did a 500 or 1,000 word story, you would actually contribute to our understanding of history. So if you know that Everett story, and you just want to write a 500 word story, I'm telling you, you would actually be contributing to national history. And Henry Louis Gates is actually called for local historians to do that. Yeah.
This room probably has more than a handful of public school teachers and professors. And I just have, you know, my wife and I are teachers, and when we first had a meeting and talked about this whole subject, I remember I just stood up and I wasn't being rude or anything, but I said, how is it that I went to Bedford and then to Penn State and then to graduate school and I didn't know a damn thing about this?
Yeah.
What? That's the past. Right now, have you had teachers approach you and say, you know, I want to teach you about this subject?
I tried to get it in all the Johnstown schools. I wrote all the superintendents. I said, the thing is like, right, again, this is another thing that kind of happened right whenever I was trying to do that. They were like, oh my God, critical race theory. And I'm like, this is a Black history book.
Yeah.
All right. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess technically you would be in line with that because it changes the historical narrative. And then that was another thing that we just kind of went running.
You know, the small is better. And the
I had to, like,
idea of a play is just such a great idea right now.
And so, like, I mean, and the other thing is the benefits of actually fictionalizing it is because I spent 5 years immersing myself in history. I know like everything they would talk about, and then teaching myself how to structure a play, and then reading Black poetry. I see how Black people spoke in the 1920s, and then I can sit there and construct how they would have reacted fictionally to this whole true historical story. And it'll be at the Altoona Theater. I don't know how many people, but I'm hoping to have the play. I'm writing about 20 lines a day. That's like what I try to go for. But I also try to read like the poetry for about an hour to get inspired. And so I'm hoping to have that written maybe by January, and then we're going to do it, like workshop it, and then they'll cast it and all that.
Sorry to monopolize this, but Mike's question seems so compelling. And I feel like we Cheryl said to say we're something that brought us here, you know. I'm happy to ignore racism. You know, it doesn't affect me. It's a burden, pain in my ass. It's not my job to teach the world. But we had a shooting. I don't know if you remember in 2020 in above Salisbury. And the shooting, many of us in the room were appalled by it, and we wanted to not let that story get swept under the rug, just like your history.
Yeah.
But I feel like what Mike asked, since you've opened yourself up to us,
go ahead,
suggesting some things that you might be able to consider for your future. What do the white people think about this? You know, it's not my burden. Like, and Mike already said, a very good thing that I've heard many people say, like, how is it that I don't know this history? And if we don't, I'd be really curious about, you know, the interactions with the community, not just Black community, but the other community with your book and your research.
Yeah.
As part of the play. And I feel like, you know, if they think it's just like a thing that happens to Black people, okay. But Black people didn't do that to themselves.
I know.
So the other part of the story is the white people who are involved. And if they're not part of the story, why should I read it?
Yeah, I mean, I involved the white supremacist aspect. The mayor was white. And so far as white characters, I did talk about like the white newspaper journalists and their treatment of the incident. And I did in-depth reconstruction of white journalists in Johnstown at the time. So there is that element of the white community's history there. But I know what you mean. But then again, you're like, how do you know how the white community interacted with it if they just decided to not talk about it? So you're like, because my whole family's from there, and they didn't tell my mom and dad. And when I told my dad, he's like, I've never heard of this at all. So I don't know how his granddad interacted with it because he didn't tell him. So,
Penny Dad, you're a reporter.
Yeah, these are all challenging questions, but again, I also drive Uber for a living. So. Things I'd love to explore, but there are so many investigative projects that I've actually had to sit there and say, I don't have the money for this. And there are times like when newspapers were dying, but like there were times like I found a story about a freedom rider from Somerset. And I had to pay for like a picture of like a freedom riding bus, because it would be like the perfect newspaper layout, right? And I paid for it myself instead of the publisher, because I just wanted that story to like have that pop on the page. And so like paying like the National Civil Rights Museum for like the bus ride photo of like the flaming bus. And then I got a picture of like the guy and then the photo. It's just kind of funny because I mean, I think like 200 people read it online, but it was like kind of a cool story about a freedom rider from Somerset. And it was like this really crazy thing where it would get like glass shattered and you drive around Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers. And I don't know, I mean, these stories were fascinating for me to tell them, even if there was only a few thousand people that interacted with the story, you say, I still think it makes me more interesting person to talk to. You know, like whenever you sit there and you're like, your Uber driver did that, you're like, here's a $5 tip. You know? But you know,
We got a request for you to repeat the newspaper resource, the website that you cited.
Yeah,
early
there's a great repository for secondary sources called newspapers.com. And it's very simple to remember. And you know, there's been a lot of revolutions in secondary sources, and as they add these newspapers to these repositories, the type of research I conducted would be also possible probably for one of you. And if your local newspaper, its whole historical record were stored, I don't know if a book would be possible because it wasn't on this scale, but you might have a really cool magazine article that got published in like Pennsylvania history. And then you'd sit there and say, you know, and then even though that might not make you a millionaire, as somebody does research nationally, you're still doing a public service and compiling this in an academic article or something like that. Where like that Everett sign, if someone decided to consult that, they'd say, this was also a sundown town and this is what we know about it. And you would be a person that actually contributed to that history. So I encourage you to do it. All right, is that it? Yeah.
So what primarily were the fields, jobs, professions that these displaced persons have? I'm just trying to put myself in the moment.
Most
like
were
2,000 people disappear from my factory.
Most were low. Most were low skilled. I don't think they went south. So like when on the south, there were actually black and white people working on sharecropping arrangements together. But they didn't go, I don't think they went back to sharecropping arrangements. So my guess is they went to like Pittsburgh and worked in the mill.
And what did they do in Johnstown?
They worked in the mill.
They worked in the mill. So 2,000 people suddenly disappear from the mills.
Is there a labor shortage? I don't ask that question.
What did the rest of the people think? Even if they were tended to be.
There was they had challenges filling those jobs. But you also have to remember this is also during a massive immigration wave. And so as they're leaving, other people are also arriving. Yeah, and they're being replaced probably by white European immigrants.
Mass amount of people migrated to Johnstown.
Yeah, and that was whenever it's hard to believe that it was actually growing at one point. But yeah, you know. All right, that about wrap it up then.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can just,
You okay?
yeah. I'm just gonna, I know. Out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you all for coming to this, our very inaugural speaker series thing. And
Great start.
yeah. Thank you. We want to continue. We're not sure who our next speaker will be, but stay tuned. We will definitely let you know. And
Stay tuned
now
and leave
it's-
your name behind so that when we do put the second program on,
yeah,
we contact you.
yeah, there is a book, our little guest book there that they could sign, right?
Yes.
And with the contact, so we can let you know. And of course, we'll advertise it like we did before. We're aiming, I don't know if we can do it in the winter because we'd like to have outside access. Well, stay tuned. And if it's dark out, and if anyone needs help getting to their car, we're more than happy to help folks get to their car. Just let us know.
I
Cheryl?
asked everyone to turn the flashlight on their smartphones on and help each other. We have one light outside. It's going to be part of our improvement project.
Do we still have snacks and drink outside?
Yes, we do.
Just turn your headlights on in your car, that'll do it.
Pull the cover off and take some snacks on your way out.
Yeah.
Or mingle and talk to each other.
Yeah. Yes. Don't have to hurry home.
Yeah.